Hello, everyone. This is Sean from the Soccernostalgia blog. I have the pleasure to interview Scottish author Mr. Matt Corr. Mr. Corr is the author of Celtic Glasgow related books such as Invincible, Harry Hood, Twice as Good, and co-author of Walfrid and the Bhoys, Celtic's founding fathers, first season, and early stars. This interview is separate from a podcast series. This video interview will serve as a companion piece to a written blog presentation on Celtic Glasgow's adventure in the 2002-2003 UEFA Cup. Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Yes, hello, Shahan. How are you?
As we come to the year 2002, can you paint a picture of the status of Celtic in Scottish football at this point?
Yeah, I suppose it was a good time for Celtic. It's an excellent time for Celtic. So the nineties had been the opposite. We had struggled for a number of reasons on and off the park. But by 2002, Martin O'Neill had been in. Martin O'Neill had been his first couple of seasons, and he was really building something pretty special. Fabulous team, and there was a real feel good factor about Celtic around about that time. So yeah, these are, can't believe it's 20 years plus ago, but these were really good times for Celtic, and largely on the back of Martin O'Neill arriving in the summer of 2000 and building the most fantastic team. So yeah, these were good times.
You mentioned Martin O'Neill. Can you describe his position and status at this point?
Yeah, I mean Martin O'Neill's right up there with for me anyway, with the very greatest of Celtic managers. So Martin had arrived, I say, the summer of 2000. We were pretty much on our knees at that time, but within a year or so, Celtic had really, I guess, turned the screw, became dominant in Scotland. Won a treble in his first season, which we hadn't done since the time of Jock Stein back in the late 60s. So I guess certainly the first one I'd enjoyed as an adult, as a wee boy back then in Jock's time. But so yeah, so first season swept the boards domestically into Champions League for the first time in season two. A bit of a mixed bag then. We pretty much unbeatable at home. Celtic Park was a fortress and won all three games, but conversely on the road we lost all three games and exited Champions League on goal difference. So won the league again in 2002, lost the Cups, which I still look back and ask myself why. I mean, Rangers were a decent enough side at that time, but for me, Celtic were always a superior side. With Larsson, we just had so many great players. So at the start of that season, I guess, we were looking for more. There was a real feeling of optimism on the back of, as I say, two wonderful seasons, and Celtic were looking, I guess, to take the next step, maybe progress in Europe, get our cups back, as Callum would say recently. So yeah, the start of 2002, 2003, real feeling of optimism that we were on the brink of something a bit special. That's my recollection anyway, Shahan.
Let's look at the transfer activity in the off season. What were your impressions at the time?
Well, the transfers, well, that's a strange one, Neil. From memory, Martin done a lot of his big business, his good business early in the first season. So he would inherit Lubo, he would inherit Paul Lambert. These guys were all absolutely crucial. But in his first season, he would sign Chris Sutton, they'd bring in Chris Sutton, Alan Thompson, Neil Lennon. They were all in by Christmas. So he was really building his team very much for the start. It's very much front loaded, Martin's transfer activity. Bringing and also Didier Agat, I should also mention Didier Agat we got for something like 50,000 in revelation, fastest thing in two legs. Season two was John Hartson came in, so that was the other big sort of £6 million. These were all mega signings for Celtic at the time. So season three, I think we've done too much. Magnus Hedman, the goalkeeper, he would come in then on the back of the World Cup in Japan and Korea. I'm struggling to think if there's too many others. So most of Martin's transfer activity was done up front, and then he sort of ran with that pretty much, bringing maybe guys like Ulrich Lawson for Hibs. He would also come in that summer from memory. So quite quiet, and mainly building on the team that he had, bringing one or two youngsters through, but mainly that team. By the third season, I would say Martin's team was established. He was tweaking it rather than making major adjustments. That's my recollection anyway, Shahan.
Also, little known Spanish striker David Fernandez from
Yeah.
Livingston.
Yes, aye,
Uh,
of course.
and otherwise, you had Liam Miller coming back from loan. But yeah, like you said, not much activity.
That's interesting. So David Fernandez, the season before, I forgot about David, to be honest. He was a bit of a peripheral player at Celtic, but he had been outstanding at Livingston. Remember, Livingston had just been promoted. They had a wonderful season. I remember they held us to a draw at Almondvale. I think Henrik missed a penalty. Fernandez was the star of that team. I think we paid about £1 million for him. Maybe great things, but if you think about, he was trying to break into a forward line that included Larsson, Sutton, and Hartson. So he didn't have his challenges to seek. Liam Miller.
Liam Miller, he came back from loan. He'd been at Aarhus at Denmark.
I forgot about that. Yeah, so yeah, Liam, God rest him. He passed away a young man. That was pretty tragic. So Liam's season would come the next season. So again, he'd come in probably quite under the radar a wee bit, I guess, from that season. Liam was from Cork, like Adam Ida and I guess Roy Keane, other great Celts for the Rebel County. But Liam's season was to come. David would play a bit part. I know David played in one of the early rounds in the UEFA Cup. But as I say, I guess the big statement there is Martin's team is established and ready to go for season 3 with minimal tweaks. These guys were probably more as covered at that stage. The team pretty much picked itself every week.
And we should mention that in the new year, like in February 2003, you would have the Slovakian defender Stanislav Varga. He came from Sunderland. Yeah. Otherwise a stable side.
Very much so. That's my recollection, very much so.
Let's discuss the backbone of the side at that point.
I guess if you look through the spine of the team, Celtic would play 3 at the back at that time. Bould, another guy who came in the sort of first early days, big signing from Toulouse in France, big powerful man. At centre half, also Jusufal Haran, Martin O'Neill. Back in 2000, Martin had been working just after he'd been appointed at Celtic. He was doing he was doing the World Cup for the sort of Euros for the BBC, and Big Use was playing with Belgium. Done well. It's unusual to pick players from a tournament who then do really well. In my experience, it doesn't always work like that. But Use was another one who pretty much picked himself. So from memory, these were the big Johan Mjällby, another guy inherited. These were tremendous Celts. Big Johan, what a servant he was for Celtic. So the back 3 pretty much picked itself. In central, in the midfield, you had Lennon and Lambert, I guess, is your sort of beating heart. On the wings, you had Agat and Thompson. These would probably be the main guys. With Lubo as your attacking, as your 10. And up front, any combination of Henrik, John Hartson and Chris Sutton. And of course, the joke was there was 3 Chris Suttons. So if Big John and Henrik were both fully fit, then Chris could equally do a job in midfield or even in centre half. So pretty much, from my memory, pretty much those 12 players, if you like, the 11 they started came from that pool more often than not. And certainly when everyone was fully fit. So 20 years on, you can still rhyme off that team. That's without notes. So it's, as you can imagine, it's a very, very stable, solid team with experience all the way through. In goal, prior to Magnus Hedmans is joined that summer. Rob Douglas had gloves. Rob had came for Dundee. He was another fairly big money signing for Celtic back, £1 million. Big Rob cost, I think, from Dundee. He'd been a standout there. The outfield guys, I mean, every one of them, probably international players, top drawer players, really strong, powerful winners and leaders. That was a tremendous team, it really was.
Celtic had largely been anonymous in Europe for the last few decades. Was there a feeling that they might be able to make an impact this particular season?
Well, yeah, I think so. I guess Europe's my dream, still is. I think I was born just a wee bit too late to enjoy Lisbon. I do remember Milan, but you're right. I'd been going to see Celtic in Europe from as a teenager, and it was, again, a tale of 2 teams really. Celtic at home pretty much would beat anyone, and did. Celtic away, we struggled to get a goal sometimes, year in, year out, and because it was knockout then, Europe could consist of 1 tie, home and away leg, and you'd be out by September against Juventus or someone of that ilk. So yeah, we struggled. Even if we were doing well domestically, we struggled in Europe. It was a feeling for me that the team that Martin was building, that was pretty special and probably gave us the best opportunity of doing something in Europe that we'd had in a generation. So I think that's a fair statement, yeah.
Where were you in life as this season unfolded?
I was a dad, taking my kids to the games, really enjoying it. The year before, I took my oldest boy to Amsterdam, and Celtic had won that Champions League qualifier against Ajax, and that was probably the biggest result Celtic had in many years. We'd beaten Real Madrid in the European Cup away back in 1980, but I'm struggling to think in too many others. A knockout win over Cologne in the early 90s, but I'm really struggling to find successes in Europe, as you say, beyond the time of Jock Stein and Billy McNeil. It was pretty desperate stuff. As I say, and that's for my dream. That's my ambitions all lie in Europe. You need to be successful domestically. I get that, but the ambitions and excitement are for me with the Champions League, and I was desperate for a piece of that. So these were exciting times. We'd enjoyed the first Champions League group stage, which I say we did really powerful at home. Match against Juventus, one of the greatest nights you'll remember at Celtic Park, 4-3, and taking it right to the wire, but ultimately not just not there. Then we played Valencia in the UEFA Cup, and that went to penalties too. And Valencia at that time, they'd been in the Champions League final, I think. Yeah, they'd been in the Champions League final in the summer and beaten in penalties, I think, with Bayern. So these were top raw sides, and Celtic were going toe to toe. And I say with Larsson up, we just had so much firepower and strength. It was incredible. Maybe if we had a weakness, we could have been a bit more solid at the back, and I mean that with the greatest respect. But going forward, and with that crowd at Celtic Park behind you, it really was back in those days a fortress. I think Celtic won the first 9, or we won 8 of our first 9 Champions League ties at home, and this was and Celtic would be seeded at the bottom. These were major achievements. So yeah, I guess by 2002, 2003, there's that maybe more hope than expectation, given there'd been many years past without that success. But there was a feeling that if ever we were going to do something in Europe, this side might just be strong enough to do that. And well, largely so it proved, as we're about to discuss.
In August 2002, Celtic were in a Champions League preliminary playoff, in a qualifying phase playoff. They were facing Swiss side Basel. Celtic at home, like you said, they're unbeatable, and they defeated the Swiss side 3-1 after going behind in the second minute. They immediately scored with a Larsson penalty kick, and later Sutton, and just before the end, Sila scored a third goal. So it was seemingly a good lead. However, 2 weeks later at Basel, the Swiss side went through with the away goals rule. They defeated Celtic 2-0. Celtic's Champions League dream was already over. What was the takeaway following this elimination and the consolation of having to participate in the UEFA Cup?
Well, firstly, thanks for that, Shahan. You've just ruined my morning with these memories. So where do you start with that? So yeah, that's right. We played Basel, and we'd met Basel a few times in the past in Europe. We'd always won, but they were a decent side, as we'll talk about in a second. So first thing, I remember the game at Celtic Park. I think Henrik met us a penalty as well. So it was a strange night. Mo Salah scored the most incredible volley. He didn't score that many goals for Celtic, but this one was pretty special, just in front of us at our end. And he blasted this one into the roof of the net. He had no right to score it. It was a Brazilian goal. And at 3-1, so you're thinking, at 2-1, definitely tight. At 3-1, we might be okay. But there's always that, as I mentioned there, there's always that nervousness about Celtic going away in Europe, that they were just a different side, for whatever reason. And so it proved. I didn't get to, as I say, I was a regular at European away games. For whatever reason, I didn't get to Basel. And that was a TV game. It was a pub game, I think. And I remember they scored twice early on. They had a couple of brothers, Murat and Hassan Yakin. Big defender is now, or certainly was recently, the manager of Switzerland. He went on to a great career in coaching. But the player, the wee number 10, he was always a player I fancied for Celtic. And he was always linked with Celtic, never ever came. I think it was Hassan Yakin. And they scored a couple of goals early. We're up against it. But my memory is then, in the second half, Celtic were piling. I remember watching that in the pub. And it was late on, maybe in dying seconds, there's Chris Sutton is a hair's breadth away from equalising. So Celtic would get an away goals from memory. Yeah, 3-1, 2-0. So if Chris is, this ball passes the far post by inches, it seemed, and everybody in the pub is surging forward and trying to nod it in. And it went by and we go out. And at that time, I think you said, talking about the consolation of the UEFA Cup. I can't remember there being any consolation in the European Cup. It was absolutely devastating because, I say, having beaten Ajax and having done so well the season before and been toe-to-toe with Valencia, it felt like, where does this come from? So I was absolutely devastated. There was no consolation in the UEFA Cup at that time, none whatsoever. I was broken-hearted, simple as that.
For the UEFA Cup,
Yeah,
they start in September. They're paired against a Lithuanian side, FK Suduva. That was always destined to be a comfortable tie for Celtic. And so it proved. They win the first leg 8-1. Larsson scores a hat trick. Second leg at Konas, they win 2-0. We
yeah,
mentioned David Fernandez. He
yeah,
scored one of the goals, as did Alan Thompson. Celtic were comfortably through to the next round.
yeah, that's right. I remember David Fernandez, I think, when he scores a second goal, he gets taken out with the goalkeeper. I think he got quite a bad injury that night. He sort of lobs the goalkeeper and the goalkeeper just comes through him. I think poor David Fernandez get the worst of that one. So some sort of facial injury. So yeah. So FK Sudova, who knew it was going to follow after that? Very, very low key, Shahan.
Yeah. So the second round, Celtic faces Blackburn Rovers from the English Premier League, managed by none other than Graham Souness.
Yes, indeed.
So I imagine it must have been extra special for the Celtic. At home on October 31st, Celtic narrowly wins it with 5 minutes left when Henrik Larsson knocked in a rebound from Hartson's header. On November 14th, for the second leg, Celtic actually performs better and they win 2-0 and are through to the next round. With the elimination of a Premier League side, and admittedly, Blackburn were not one of the top teams in the Premier League, was this a catalyst in terms of advancement in a competition?
Yeah, absolutely. Just that last point there, I think people tend to forget. I think Blackburn Rovers at that time under Souness, you're right, the former Rangers player and manager, they were actually flying in England at the time, and that was a theme for all the sides we plays we moved through. From memory, Arsenal I think were still at Highbury, and I seem to recall that Blackburn Rovers at the weekend before they came to Celtic Park had beaten Arsenal at Highbury. They were top three, top four, and they were flying under Souness. I don't think they ended up winning anything. But at that particular time we met them, they were flying and probably viewed as the favourites to go through. And you're right, if I can take my green tinted specs off for a second, the night at Celtic Park, we didn't play particularly well. They looked very strong. As you say, we scored late on. Perhaps the result flattered us, but in a way, that was you used the word catalyst. What happened next was probably the catalyst for the second leg, because Souness being Souness, he would come out and basically dismiss Celtic. We were lucky to win, and he used the phrase, of course, which would come back to haunt him, men against boys. So Souness, his nature tend to be, I don't know, confrontational, arrogant, whatever. Tremendous player, don't get me wrong. But whether it's a bit of gamesmanship on his part or whether he actually believed it, perhaps a bit of both, what he did is he came out and basically dismissed Celtic out of hand as being, we'll sweep them aside in the second leg. And for me, that acted as a spur, probably not just for the players, but for support the whole club. Because there's nothing greater, there's nothing more dangerous than Celtic as an underdog and being written off. And so it proved. But on the night at Celtic Park, it was a long night, and you wouldn't probably have bet too much on Celtic going down to Blackburn and then beating them. Conversely, the return leg down there, I was lucky enough to be down there that night. It was a brilliant European night. It seems strange talking about a game in England's a European night, but I mean, to all intents and purposes, it didn't have all the hassle of the airports and all that travel. It was a group of us. I was drinking in Mulgai at the time. A group of us went down in a minibus. We had a minibus. We went down and stayed in Preston, which is not far, and went through to Blackburn on the day of the match. What a night! There was Celtic had. I don't know if you're familiar with Ewood Park. It's a ground. It was a ground, sort of modern ground at the time. It was built with 4 stands, and we had a sort of 7,000 or 8,000 seat stand behind the goal, which again was probably another own goal by Blackburn. I don't know whether they have sold it. They gave Celtic the same ticket sort of allocations that they're giving Manchester United or Liverpool, and the place was absolutely rocking when Celtic came out. And we got off to a decent start when Sutton, ironically, a player who won the Premier League, we partnered Alan Shearer up front. Chris Sutton, I think, was playing the midfield, it would be, because Henrik and John Hartson were up front. and Chris was playing in that sort of, number 10 role and midfield role. And he scores with the most fantastic header in front of us. Sorry, that was the second goal. The first goal is a strange one. There's a couple of people, Hartson and the defender, I think, slip going through, and Henrik goes through and has the most delicious dink chip over Brad Friedel, I think, goalkeeper, to put us one up. And we never looked back. And when Chris Sutton scored early in the second half from memory, just in front of us, it was party time. Celtic destroyed them in the second leg. So whatever had happened in the first leg, we'll never know. And whether Souness's comments really acted as a spur to, I guess, the whole club. But Celtic went down there, really, they meant business that night. They attacked Blackburn for the start. This huge support rolling them on to day one. And it was the most incredible night. We stayed in a hotel in Preston afterwards. And it was with all the Irish boys, Paddy Sweeney and all these guys. Paddy, God rest him. And it was we were still, there was a sing-song going on to 3 or 4 in the morning. It was just one of the great European nights. And you mentioned earlier, we hadn't had many of those, certainly in my adult life. But Blackburn was just an incredible night for on the park and off the park. And yeah, I think for the first time we thought, maybe not dreaming of Seville at that time. I'm cautious by nature. But certainly we started thinking, we'll just be a decent English side, put them to the sword here. So if the draw is kind, we might progress here. So let's see what the draw brings. So we'll always have Blackburn, Shahan.
In the next round, Celtic actually faced a difficult task with Spanish side Celta of Vigo. On November 28th for the first leg at Glasgow. Again, Celtic won with the narrowest of margins. And again, Henrik Larsson heading in the winner in the 52nd minute. The second leg on December 12th, Celta took the lead in the 23rd minute from Jazuli, but Hartson tied the match in the 37th minute. Celta had to score at least 2 more goals. They managed to score 1 goal in the 54th minute from the South African Benny McCarthy, but Celtic held on and went through with away goals.
Yeah, again, like Blackburn, Celta were flying in Spain in La Liga. They were top side, tremendous record at home. From memory, we played better at Celtic Park, but still at 1-0, you're thinking this is in the balance here. So again, we were lucky enough to be in Vigo, in Galicia, in the northwest of the country. We flew out there for the trip. I have to say that was one of the longest nights of my life watching Celtic, because you're right, we're under pressure. We were pretty much under pressure for the majority of the game. They got an early goal. You're thinking, okay, this is going to be a long night. Then Big John, we didn't, in those days, European goals were still a bit of a priceless commodity. But Big John used his strength. He sort of shrugs aside the defender at the edge of the box and turns and cracks this shot low into the corner. And there's a wee group of Celtic fans sort of side on the pitch from memory were in the corner. So that means they need 2 goals. But they did get that goal early in the second half. And to all intents and purposes, they looked odds on to get the 3rd goal. That would have been enough. And I just remember watching, the clock or checking my watch or whatever it was. And it seemed to go on forever. But finally, the sigh of relief when he blew for full time, because I don't know whether it's common knowledge or whatever, but certainly for guys in my generation, that was the first time we'd been past Christmas, still in Europe, probably since Real Madrid back in 1980. So you're talking, what is that, 32, 33 years, quite incredible wait. So that sense, the monkey off the back, that sense of relief. And again, going to Spain, where we didn't have a great record, and managing to survive. I say this was a top side. There again, top 4, top 5 in Spain, that league. That seemed to be the pattern all the way through that tournament. But again, another long night in the park, another happy night. I think we flew straight back. We headed to the airport straight back. So quite a long trip, just in and out for Vigo. But Big John's goal, priceless goal. Only he would have scored that, because it was his strength. Defenders bent back. He's backing into defender. 9 times out of 10, defenders getting a foot in. Big John shrugged him aside, stuck the ball in the corner, and that was enough. I forgot Ben McCarthy, what a player he was. But they seemed to be flying down the flanks all night, cutting balls back, and Celtic were defending for their lives. And thankfully, we got over the line, and we could look forward to what was going to come in February. So yeah, another box ticked, Shahan.
As the season reaches midpoint, Celtic were in hunt for their third league title, and they were fighting it out with Rangers, who had improved under Alex McLeish. Celtic were still alive in the UEFA Cup as well, obviously. So was there confidence and or discussions of a possible league and Europe triumph?
Certainly not to my knowledge. I doubt very much that Martin O'Neill would have allowed that in the dressing room. Certainly publicly, it would never have been talked about. So I guess some supporters would always be confident. I'm not in that camp. I'm the prophet of doom. So until something's banked. So my focus was probably at that time that it'd be good to go far in Europe. Take, who comes up next, see if we get through another round, take it from there. But the big one as always would be to try and retain the league title, because again, that gives you your shot at the Champions League for the following season, which is, for me where it was at. In those days, it was quite a straightforward competition. It was just the groups, and then on you went. It was a smaller competition in terms of numbers of teams. So certainly no recollection for me of any big talk about conquering Europe and Grand Slams or any of that kind of stuff. Certainly not to my recollection, Shahan. No.
We come to the new year 2003. In the fourth round of the UEFA Cup, Celtic are facing German side Stuttgart, managed by Felix Magath. The first leg against Celtic are at home. They fall behind to a Kevin Kurani goal in the 27th minute, but then storm back, and before halftime, they're 2-1 ahead. Lambert scores in the 36th minute. Sean Maloney, just before halftime in the 45th minute, scores the second goal. Midway through the second half, in the 68th minute, Petrov scores the third. Celtic win 3-1. But again, it's a reminder of the match against Basel. 2-0 is sufficient for Stuttgart. On the following week at Stuttgart, Celtic takes a quick lead. Within the first quarter hour, Alan Thompson and Chris Sutton score to give Celtic a 2-0 lead, and the tie is seemingly set at this point. Stuttgart storms back and they win the match 3-2 with a late goal. But I think after Celtic had taken a quick 2-0 lead, Stuttgart had a mountain to climb.
Yeah, well, I guess listening to you talk about it like that, it sounds more comfortable than it felt in Stuttgart that night. So yeah, there's a big thing in there that Henrik Larsson, so Celtic's talisman, Henry, I think he'd fractured his jaw in a collision, and he missed the Stuttgart tie completely. He was out for a number of weeks. I'm sure it was a fractured jaw. But so Sean Maloney started for the home game. So yeah, my younger son's a bit of a connoisseur of European football. He'd warned us about Kevin Kurani. He was doing great things at that time. Sure as fate, Kurani scores with a great header, and you're really up against it. You're a goal down at home, given what's happened in the previous rounds, how tight it's been, really up against it. And then I guess that's one of the greatest, bravest Celtic performances that I can recall, because I say we're playing without Larsson, up against a top side. We're a goal down at home in the first leg. Where's this going? And then we managed to claw our way back. I think they had a player sent off as well. But you're right. Lambert scores a beautiful volley up at our end. Sean Maloney bundles one in, I think, with the goalkeeper as well. And then Stan Petrov scores a goal he's no right to score. So it's up at the far end. He's chasing the ball towards the byline. To me, looking to cut, to keep it in, to cut it back, and somehow he manages to beat the goalkeeper at his near post. It's a fabulous goal. But even at 3-1, you're right. 3-1 is, the tie is very much the balance. Stuttgart, then there's right. Two games were played within a week. I'd forgotten that. So we're in Germany the next week, and I guess that's a really poignant trip for me, because my dad was there, God rest him, and my son. So there's 3 Matt Corrs in Stuttgart. And it would prove to be his last trip. He wasn't well, and he passed away later that year. But it was quite an emotional trip. We stayed in a hotel in Stuttgart itself. It was a great day there. And believe it or not, at the bottom in the mall of the hotel, there's an Irish bar. So we could go back at night and we could sit and listen to, get conversation, listen to our songs or whatever. It was a brilliant trip. The match itself, as you say, we got off to the most incredible start. In my head, it's within the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It might have been slightly long, but Celtic starting fire. Didier Gap, I mentioned earlier, the fastest thing in 2 legs. My recollection is he was rocketed down the right-hand side. The first time he puts a cross over, Alan Thompson scores a brilliant diving header, similar to one he scored or he would score at Munich later. Great goal. And then again, another piece of magic for a Gap, takes the defence out and leaves by Chris with a Sutton with a tap in. So 2-0, you're thinking, we're 5-1 ahead in the tie. Surely that'll be enough. They had a player called Alexander Leb, who Belarusian, and he went to Arsenal, I think later on that year. He's a tremendous player. And of course the Germans were up for it big time. So they just couldn't put them away. They got a goal back quite quickly, I think, and then in the second half, the big thing for me, I was delighted we went through, obviously, but I was gutted we didn't win a game in German soil. To my memory, we still haven't, and the time to do it. We're 2 goals ahead after whatever 10 minutes and flying, and we still couldn't manage to get that win. In fact, we ended up losing the game, as you say, later on. But yeah, I guess the main takeaway was we were in the quarterfinals. Now the draw must have been made for the quarterfinals by that time, because another vivid recollection I have is at the end of the game, a real touch of class this for me from Stuttgart. At the end of the game, on the big screen, they flashed up something like "Good luck, Celtic. We'll see you at Anfield," which I thought was just a most tremendous touch. I mean, they would have been confident in going through that night. They were doing very well in Bundesliga as well, like the other sides. They were not a side who were struggling. They would probably think at 3-1 they were in with a boxer's chance to beat Celtic at home, and that was probably fair. So for them to then lose the game and then put that up on the screen, I just thought that was a real touch of class. Good luck, Celtic. See you at Anfield. I think Bonnie Tyler also sang that night in terms of bizarre connections. For some reason, the singer, I don't know if you're aware, Bonnie Tyler is a Welsh singer. Back when I was...
Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Yes, Total Eclipse of the Heart. And I'm going to be back. Lost in France. So these were... We used to listen to the charts at the weekend. So Bonnie Tyler, I've no idea how that connection came about or if it's still there. Probably still is. But she sang at the start of the game, and the place was going mental. It was a big Celtic support again. I don't know, 7,000 or 8,000 perhaps. A whole end of the stadium. And the German trips are always brilliant trips anyway. But I remember being in Stuttgart, as I say, with my dad with us, so it was a bit more sensible. We're still there, a few drinks during the day, and then a game at night. And then, as I say, the hotel bar at night, you're just feeling great about life through again. And so that they were very special times, Shahan, for a whole number of reasons. So we'll always have Stuttgart.
In the spring quarterfinal rounds in March, Celtic were to face their most difficult test against Liverpool.
Yeah.
What was the outlook ahead of these matches?
Right, well, I guess the first thing would be huge excitement. There was a bit of a race against the clock to get Henrik fit. I can't remember if that was announced just before the game or whatever, but Henrik hadn't played for probably a month or so since he'd had the injury. Now he came back, and Henrik being Henrik, he came back and I think he scored the goal in the opening minute. And the place was absolutely bouncing. That would be the night, I think it would be the night Jerry Marsden, Jerry and the Pacemakers. I think Jerry came and did walk on the park. So there'd be maybe 3,000 Liverpool fans and 50,000 of us all singing together, and that was pretty special. And then, although before that, big John Harrison hit the bar in about 10 seconds. I think right for the kickoff, big John hit the bar. So again, that was one of those nights for Celtic right for the start. It went out. Henry got the goal, things looking great. And then they get an equaliser quite quickly from memory. Would that be Emil Heskey, maybe?
Yeah, 70th minute, yeah.
So I think, and it sort of killed the atmosphere a wee bit. So at 1-1, so Celtic had played, this was the third, I think I'm right in saying that, this is the third time Celtic had played Liverpool in Europe. Back in Jock Steven's first season, we quite controversially lost in the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup. Bobby Lennox got a goal disallowed at Anfield that would have taken Celtic through. And the final was at Hampden that year against Borussia Dortmund. So Celtic could have been in a European final a year before Lisbon and playing it a few miles from Celtic Park, which would have been spectacular. But anyway, Liverpool got the nod. Dortmund beat them in the finals, it turned out. And then we played them again in Wim Janssen's season. And that had been a draw at Celtic Park, where Celtic probably should have won. And down at Anfield, it finished goalless. So Liverpool had qualified twice. So there was a feeling that maybe there was a score to settle here. And again, as you mentioned, they were a strong side, and they would win in the Champions League a couple of years later. They were developing a tremendous side. So I guess my feeling going down to Anfield at 1-1 was, this is going to be a tough ask. this is really going to be a stretch to get this over the line. But where there's hope, kind of thing. I was due to go down to Anfield. I'm still working at the time. I'd been offered hospitality. It's quite unusual. And then quite suddenly my mum died on the night before. My mum died the night before the Liverpool game from memory, quite unexpectedly. So obviously we weren't down there. So again, my memories at that time are, I guess, bittersweet. Doesn't really cover it. So we watched that game at home. A couple of my nephews went ahead and they were captured on the TV. And I always think with an extra man that night. So yeah, quite a special night. Thompson scores the most remarkable free kick. The wall jumps and just before half time, I think, the wall jumps and Thompson puts it in from Alan Thompson puts it in from maybe 20 yards up at the Kop end. And I think Celtic played really well that night. I guess I say a lot of other things going on, but my recollection is Celtic played well last night. I didn't know the score. Watching it live, it was on the background with people in the house, whatever. And then John scores this most incredible. In fact, I think we might have watched it after people left. That's what it was, because some people knew the score and I didn't. And then John scores this, probably the goal of his life. I think John Hartson also the soft spot for Liverpool, Swansea boy, I know. But also, I'm sure he had the soft spot for Liverpool to scoring a goal at Anfield. I think his parents might have been up behind the goal that night. And Big John hits this shot. Plays a 1-2 with Larsson. And then that's the most incredible shot into where the Anfield Road, where the Celtic fans were. And that was a special night. At that point now you're thinking, we're in the last four here. We may just have a chance. It's maybe even for me, it's time to start dreaming. So that was Liverpool. So many things happening.
For the semi-finals, Celtic had seemingly an easier task as they faced unfancied Portuguese side Boa Vista. Was that the general outlook?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, certainly nobody at the club would ever say that. I'm quite certain. Not real recollection of it, but I do remember Porto beat Lazio. So if you're looking at three options of Porto, the Portuguese champions, Boa Vista, who, from memory, had sort of limped through the tournament, and away goals and penalties and whatever, or Lazio, going to Rome, going to the Olympico. Certainly, I'd have taken Boa Vista any day of the week. But so there was a possibility of an all-Porto final, which I think certainly at that time would have been unique, a final between two sides of the same city. I know, but later you would have it with Madrid, certainly. But I think at that time that would have been quite unique. So yeah, I think the feeling was Celtic getting Boa Vista was the better of the three options. I think that's fair without being in any way disrespectful to the Portuguese side.
The first leg at Glasgow on April 10th, actually, Celtic had somewhat of a scare. They fall behind through a Valgaeren own goal in the 48th minute, but Larsson immediately equalizes, but Celtic are held at home 1-1. 2 weeks later, on April 24th, they come away with an away win as Henrik Larsson scores a crucial goal with about 10-11 minutes left. Celtic are in their first final, I guess it must be since 1970, right?
Yeah, 33 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Memory plays tricks with there, Shahan. I would have thought that the own goal was early in the first half. So, but you're right, we did equalise right away. So yeah, the own goal was at our end. So I always had it in my mind that was the first half. But Celtic must have changed around, and Henry missed a penalty as well, I think, against Boa Vista. And there's always another memory that comes back to that night. There's a few things. Celtic were playing in the semi-final of a European tournament for the first time since 1974. So as a wee boy, I was lucky enough to, as I say, I was just a wee bit late to, I guess, really enjoy the great team as an adult. I was lucky enough to be at the European Cup semis of 72 against Inter Milan. We lost in penalties. And then against Atletico Madrid in that infamous game 2 years later.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that felt really, really weird, being at a European game at Celtic Park in the spring, was like daylight as opposed to the nights under the lights and everything else. It's a strange memory, but I always remember sitting at the ground thinking, this is really weird. We're playing here and it's springtime. And there's another one. I remember Neil Lennon at one point passed the ball back. There was an almost universal groan, if not booing, for the crowd because the ball had went back. I remember Lennon sort of looking up as if to say, what on earth's going on? So some strange memories. We lost a goal. And I always think Celtic are much better as an underdog than a favourite. And probably for one of the few times in that European run Celtic would be the favourites to beat Boavista, certainly in many people's eyes. And as it turned out, that was the tie that they didn't win. And I guess having to go to Portugal for the second leg, then that was your thinking, oh, we've came through so many huge hurdles here. Are we going to fall at this stage? That would be heartbreaking. The second leg I didn't get to Porto for reasons I've touched on earlier. So I remember I was watching that in my dad's house with him. It was a horrible game. Nerves obviously played a huge part in that, but it's also, if I remember rightly, yeah, it would be right. They were building the stadiums for the Euro 2004, which would be held the following summer in Portugal, and Boa Vista's ground was one of those. So it was almost like a building site. The memory I think there was nothing behind either goal, and the Celtic fans were all in one stand and one side and whatever. So it was the strangest. Having been to the likes of Anfield and Stuttgart and Vigo and even Blackburn, it was a sort of strange surroundings for a European game. The crowd would have been small. Boa Vista seemed to be playing, just to go through and away goals. It felt that way. They didn't seem to have any great adventure. Lots of time waste and all that stuff that drives you bananas. Celtic didn't play particularly well, as my memory as well. And then, as you mentioned there, it was getting towards squeaky bum time, as Fergie would say, with 10 minutes to go or whatever. And there's a bit of a ping pong, and in the visitors' box, the ball's bouncing around, and then Henrik scores a goal. Only he would score. He sort of manages to change his body shape or whatever to get a foot to it, and it sort of keeper gets a hand to it, and it sort of trickles over the line into the side of the net, and it's just the most unlikely Henrik goal ever. But only he would have gotten the end of it. Nobody else would have converted it. It was a half chance at best. Then of course they turned the game on its head. They start launching high balls and everything's going in, and again, like Vigo, it's a long last 10 minutes. And then that sense of relief when you're through, it's a wee bit surreal. As I say, I'm not there in the stadium that night, but I can absolutely relate to what the euphoria that would be in the stands with the folk that's waited so long. I mean, it's a generation, 2 generations perhaps, who've never seen Celtic in a final, and finally you're thinking, am I going to get taken with my kids to see a European final? That would just be surreal. I couldn't have dreamt of that. No matter how strong our side was, I couldn't have dreamt we'd have been in that final a few months earlier. But I mean, very much deserved, richly deserved, for all the reasons. It's quite a special time.
The final was set to take place at Sevilla in Spain against Portuguese giants Porto, managed by a then relatively unknown Jose Mourinho. What did you know of Porto at this time?
Well, I probably know quite a bit about Porto. I've always followed European football all the way through. I remember Porto winning their first European Cup when they beat Bayern way back 87. Yeah, so it was 87. Okay, so I remember that, and then of course we'd played them in the first Champions League group. We beat them at Celtic Park. Ironically enough, Henrik again, the only goal of the game, a volley at the far end. They beat us comprehensively in Oporto, 3-0. So I knew more about Porto than I would about Mourinho. It seems strange to say that now, because Mourinho has been a central character, isn't he? European football, world football now for 2 decades, still is, still getting headlines wherever he goes. But back then, I don't think we knew too much about Mourinho. That's my recollection. But certainly about Porto, I knew we'd have our work cut out to beat them, but we had beaten some tremendous sides. It was a one-off tie. Chances are the Celtic support in Seville was going to outnumber the Portuguese, and that's exactly how it turned out. So I guess without knowing a lot about the individual qualities of the Portuguese players, it's a one-off final, and I think it's written in the stars here. It's written in the stars that we're doing this. I don't know who were the favourites for the bookies, but potentially the Portuguese were, if people were looking at it objectively and without passion, without emotion. But certainly I felt we had a real chance. I thought we were going to make history.
We have to remember, in the weekend following this match, that was the final weekend of the Scottish League, and Celtic and Rangers were neck to neck in the title race. Was this ultimately negative pressure on the team ahead of the final?
Maybe answer that a slightly different way. I think, and it's been proven in later years, that there was certainly a case that fighting on several fronts cost us. The most obvious example of that would be went to Liverpool in March. And I think that Martin changed his team for the weekend visit to Inverness. who I think might have been in the lower division still, Inverness Cali Thistle. And 2-3 days after winning at Anfield, Celtic were knocked out of the Scottish Cup at Inverness Cali Thistle. So, and part of that, I think, I'll never know for sure, is maybe a bit of trying to focus and progress in all tournaments. So you were right, they were neck and neck in the league, and there's a couple of key matches that sort of shaped that league as it turned out. So having those two games together, my feeling would be the focus would be entirely on Seville for that game. I think if you offered any Celtic fan the choice of Seville or no Seville, but a league title, certainly for me it would be Seville. Seville is magical memories, so we'll always have that. I'd love to have won both. I think the way I'd probably answer that is coming back from the heartbreak of Seville to then have to go again against the odds a wee bit on the Saturday or the Sunday, perhaps it was, then that was probably just a bridge too far for that season. I think the team were on its knees. Even with that, I mean, they moved mountains. Rugby Park's a difficult ground to go to. And I remember watching that game and thinking, Celtic are really going for this. It was, some things are just meant to be, Shahan. And I think that particular league season, no matter what Celtic were going to do that day, it wasn't going to be enough. Perhaps just leave it at that.
Can you discuss your memories of this final match against Porto?
Oh my goodness, where do you start? Yeah, I one of the most bittersweet experiences ever. We only managed to, the only way I could do this was to try and get tickets, was to get a day flight to go in. So we flew out in the morning of the match, I think from Prestwick. Anyway, we got to Seville. I've never seen anything like it. I was trying to meet up with my family in Seville. I had the kids with me. My wife was with me. We went into Seville. It was just, everything was green and white. Apparently there's a cathedral there. I never seen it because all you could see was supporters. I've always vowed to go back and actually see Seville because I believe it's a beautiful city. But all we could see was Celtic strips. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the numbers you're familiar with. The stadium was too small. The stadium was a sort of 50,000 seater, and there was more Celtic supporters in Seville than there was seats in the stadium. It was incredible, manic. I remember going up to the game. I've never known security like it at the stadium. There seemed to be 3 or 4 different checks to go through. They were crazy about security to get in. And then my abiding memory of Seville, or one of them certainly, is coming up the stairs into the stadium for the first time. The visual image of Celtic strips. I'm wearing my Seville strip today, especially for you, Shahan. It's one of my favourite kits. But the visual image of all these people wearing hoops all around the stadium, that will live with me forever. Very, very emotional. The most incredible sight. I mean, you look at photos taken from whatever angle of that stadium, or watch the match. The visual image of the Celtic support is just something I've never ever seen since. Incredible. So very, very emotional for reasons we've talked about. Having the kids there, something I thought I'd never. If I'm being honest, I never thought I'd see a European final with Celtic. My dad was in Lisbon, God rest him, but I never thought I'd see it. So I'm eternally grateful with the chance to experience that. That was incredible. Game itself seemed to fly by in an instant. Celtic really, I remember Celtic playing well, but so did they. They were an attacking side. Sides were going for it. And the other thing probably to mention is Henrik Larsson. Larsson was at a level above most players for me. In a lifetime of supporting Celtic, he's up there with Jinky and with Kenny, absolutely superlative player. But he played the game of his life. If there's ever a definition of a big game player, it's Henrik Larsson. And he played that night. He scored his 200th goal. The first goal he's no right to score. Didier Gap puts a cross from the flank. We're a goal down. The ball comes back off of Rob Douglas, and they had a striker called Derley, who was the top goal scorer. He was scoring for fun that year. I think he's a Brazilian. They had a lot of Brazilian players. Deco, who was a genius of a player as well. So it sort of became Deco versus Larsson at one point. I mean, that's simplifying it, but it felt like that a wee bit. Deco would go to Barcelona on the back of that stint he had at Porto. Anyway, Larsson's first goal, we're a goal down early in the second half. Early in the second half, because Derley scores at our end. We've got an angle to die for because the cross comes across to the far side. Henrik's jumping. It feels like he's jumping on the byline with a defender, and he somehow nods it across back towards us again, and it loops over the goalkeeper, Bayer, and drops in off the post. It's a fabulous goal. And then again, the score. The second goal, we were at fault for the first, and the third goal's comedy. The third goal is classic us in Europe, sadly. But the second goal is a great goal. The player 1-2, and Deco plays this pass that only he sees, and the chap goes through and buries it. And then Henrik comes back again, corner from our side. He's up there with a classic, typical Henrik header, and it's 2 each. At 2 each, I think we're winning. If I'm being honest, even me, the prophet of doom, Mr. Caution, at 2 each, I think we're winning. We've came back twice. It's in the stars. Henrik's for the hat trick, or we're winning this 3-2. Then Bould gets sent off, second booting, gets sent off, and then they have this ricochet, ridiculous goal where it bounces off people, bounces off defenders on the line and gets in. A goal only we would lose in Europe, and that's enough. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, I have to say. That feeling coming out of the stadium was hard to describe. Even now, I couldn't watch that game for a long, long time. I had the video. I couldn't watch it for a long time. Eventually I did. I'm doing some research and I thought, I'm going to have to put myself through this. And in fairness, they did, they were a good side. They did play well. There was other aspects that you might go into that weren't so great that night. But they were a superb team. The following year, I think I'm right in saying, the following year, they would win the Champions League. So they would go to Gelsenkirchen and beat Monaco. And they're probably the last side from out with the top 5 to win the Champions League. And as I say, Mourinho would go to Chelsea and Real Madrid. And their players would go to Barcelona and whatever. So they were, I guess if there's a side you didn't want to meet in the UEFA Cup final that year, it was this hungry Portuguese side under this manager who was basically going to become a world beater and within months. So, but what a journey it was, Shahan, for all that disappointment, heartbreak. My goodness, some of those highs, and these are memories that will live with me forever. I'd waited a long time for it, as had so many other Celts, as I say. So to be there in Blackburn and Vigo and Stuttgart and witness that, and still to be able to talk, we don't talk about it too much, but to be talking about it now, 20 years on, it's like it was yesterday. It really does. It was an incredible time. They were a fabulous team, the best team for me post. If you take the Lisbon Lions to the side. The best Celtic team probably in my lifetime. I'll be blessed if I see a team as good as that again.
Speaking of the game, most Celtic fans and Martin O'Neill himself questioned Porto's gamesmanship. Was that the general belief amongst the Celtic fans?
I very much so. Probably not just among the Celtic fans. I sort of bordered on pantomime and stuff. The goalkeeper coming out for a cross ball, and then he'd be rolling, 10 yards to this side and 5 back the way again. I'm exaggerating, I guess, but that's what it felt like. There was lots of, what would you call it, the dark arts or whatever. There was lots of that going on. They'll say it's gamesmanship, part of the game, but I don't like it. Most folk don't. They were a great side. They didn't need to do it. They were a great side. It was, they were capable of beating Celtic without any of that nonsense. I think, ironically, we played in Victor Baez's testimonial game a few years later, but it's funny as could get my head round. I think Celtic went to Porto and played in his benefit game. So you've got to have a sense of humour. I wasn't laughing that night because you're desperately trying to get that equaliser as the game goes on and you're watching this nonsense. So, yeah, I didn't like that. But if I'm trying to be balanced and reflecting on it 20 years down the line, they were a decent side with some wonderful players, a manager that obviously had something special. Whatever your thoughts on him, he had something, didn't he? Let's be honest, to achieve what he has achieved in the game. So that was a downside, but I'll try and focus. The King of Kings was brilliant that night. The Celtic support were unbelievable, and even in defeat, there's another wee ride. We didn't win the UEFA Cup, and I'm broken-hearted about that. But the fans' behaviour was impeccable. We get awards from UEFA and FIFA in terms of fairness, and I guess it represented the really nice side of football. That in defeat, I remember getting out and there's Portuguese folk floating around, no hassle, people were chatting away. It was a long, long day. It took a long time to be able to actually go back and reflect on that, maybe sensibly, and watch the game again. And I believe there are people who have still never watched it. You sometimes see the comment on social media, I've never watched that game again. I've watched it once in 20 years, and that was probably for work, because I had to do something. And then you could take the goods and you could see what else was going on that night. And it wasn't meant to be, Shahan. It wasn't meant to be. One of those things.
This was followed by the title loss to Rangers by goal difference only. Was there a feeling that fortune and luck was against Celtic at this point?
Yeah, well, I think that's an understatement. You're determined to ruin my morning here, aren't you? So a few days later, you're right, you've got to pick yourself up. My belief always was if Celtic had won in Seville, they'd won the league at the weekend as well. We'll never know. But so having to pick yourself up at at Kilmarnock, a difficult venue, again, packed out with Celtic fans. There was a time where I always felt, my recollection of it is, always felt, with one exception, we were chasing our tail. We were behind at the start. So if they called the league then, we would have lost it anyway. So we also had to do a bit more than they did. They need a home tie against a side I think it was relegated or certainly struggling. So they had a very winnable game at home with their own support. We were at a difficult place, Rugby Park, where we'd win the league the following year, funny enough. But there's a point in time we're watching the game, and the two games have been played simultaneously. There's a point in time where I think Alan Thompson scores penalty maybe, and at that point Chris Sutton scores an early goal. There's a time in the second half where briefly Celtic are ahead. I think it's only that time, and very quickly they get the goal they need, and even right at the end, I think we miss a penalty as well at the end, and as it turns out we lose it by a goal. So yeah, it's the strangest thing in Martin O'Neill's tenure at Celtic Park. We lost 2 titles by the narrowest of margins in the dying seconds of the season, and the three he did win, he's winning by 18, 20 points. It's something that still chokes a wee bit. But from Martin O'Neill's side, for that period of 2000 to 2005, even the last season with no Henrik, for me, I'm biased, I get it. But for me, Martin O'Neill's side for all 5 of those years was a stronger side than anything else. So that should have been 5 in a row in my head. It wasn't like, that sometimes these things happen. So we lost 2 titles by the narrows. That one particularly so, I guess, because it turns out that in what is a most incredible season, remarkably, you have no silverware at all. We went out of the League Cup. Can't remember, we went out of the League Cup. Hibs at Easter Road, maybe? Can't remember. But we were out of the League Cup, which was a tournament we didn't tend to do well in, although we'd won the treble in the first year. And I mentioned earlier, we went out to the Scottish Cup at Inverness Cali. These were very winnable games. So a season that had so many absolute highs ended up with no silverware at all. It's bizarre. There's not been another, in my lifetime, there's not been another season like that. But strangely, and this is a question that comes up time to time in social media, would you swap Seville to win that league title? For me, not at all. No chance. 30 years down the line, I can still reflect on being there, with the boys and all the memories that led going through that with my friends and my family, my dad. Just wonderful time. So I guess if the price of Seville was a heartbreak of Kilmarnock, then I'll pay it. That's where I am. I can't speak for everyone, but that's where I am. I would do it again tomorrow to just have those memories of that special day in the south of Spain with the Celtic family from all over the world coming and just making it the most. And even in the lead up at Celtic Park, the Spanish themed restaurants going on and all that. And it's just going to a European final was, that's a peak for me. If I'm lucky enough to see another one, who knows? It's getting more difficult every year, but that's a peak for me. So I hope that makes in a sense. I'm rambling a wee bit here.
I think you've already indicated, but as far as most other Celtic historians, is this European adventure regarded in the annals of the club the same way as you perceive it?
The strange one. So the 3 European finals are very different. So there's one that stands alone, sounding like an old Celtic song. So Lisbon is Lisbon. Lisbon is the absolute Celtic fairy tale. And Celtic win another 14 European Cups. There'll never be another Lisbon. So that stands alone. 11 men for the West of Scotland taking on Internazionale in the pride of Europe at their first attempt and winning the big cup in the most dramatic circumstances, attacking football. So Lisbon's a fairy tale, that stands alone. Milan we don't talk about so much. 3 years because Celtic for me are always a wonderful, wonderful underdog. I don't often think we wear the favourite tag so well. It's just a personal view. And then Jockstein described Milan as Lisbon in reverse. And it's perfect, isn't it? So where nobody gave us a chance in Lisbon, nobody sort of gave Feyenoord a chance in Milan, and it sort of came home to bite us. So Lisbon we don't talk about so much. I don't see. I can only speak for myself. Can't speak for all the other historians. All their own personal thoughts on it. But for me, Seville is looked on. The run to Seville is probably looked on. Is it looked on more positively than Milan? Maybe. The highlight of the Milan run would be the victory over Leeds at Hampden. You've got something like 136,000 packed into Hampden watching Celtic beat this invincible, unbeatable Leeds United. So I guess the fairy tale in 1970 was in the semi when they beat, as I say, they beat this Leeds side in front of the biggest European club crowd ever. I don't think that'll ever be topped. So Lisbon stands alone. The Milan final is tinged with so much disappointment because we were so huge favourites to win it, is my take. I was only a wee boy. I remember watching the game against Feyenoord. I remember watching it very, very clearly, despite being a youngster and starting to think there'll always be next year. Well, there wasn't. There wasn't. There was two semi-finals, and then basically we were in the wilderness, as you mentioned, for many years. I think Seville, because of the timing, because it was this wonderful side of, you know, Larsson, Sutton and Lennon, Thompson, Petrov, all these wonderful players, Paul Lambert. I think Seville will still be remembered fondly, despite the disappointment of the, as you mentioned, domestically. I think Seville will still be remembered fondly. So you could probably place them in order. It's maybe Lisbon, Seville, Milan for me. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense. They're all very different, Shahan. So it's difficult to rank them, but Lisbon stands alone. Lisbon is the pinnacle. It's a pinnacle for Scottish football. It's a pinnacle for us in 136 years of history. It's even guys like Alex Ferguson say that it's probably the greatest, you know, Scottish sporting event, sporting milestone, and it's hard to argue. It's a fairy tale. So maybe there'll be another fairy tale. Maybe we'll be lucky enough to see a fourth one. That's the dream. If there's no dreams, there'll be no Lisbon.
In closing, was there a feeling that this was the end of a cycle, or was this something that could be even built up upon?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. Absolutely the second. Not the end of a cycle, not at all. For me, the platform of Seville was a platform that could have seen Celtic take another step forward and be competing in the Champions League in, you know, last eights or whatever. I'm going, I know it's getting tougher every year. So absolutely a platform to go on. It didn't turn out like that. Although what I would say is the pinnacle of so Martin O'Neill was here for 5 years, it turned out. But for me, the strongest Celtic side, although they won the treble in the first year, the strongest Celtic side in Martin's tenure would have been that side of between 2003 and 2004. Henrik's last 2 seasons at Celtic, I felt Celtic were operating at a different level. A few months after Seville, we're back in. So we did get back into Champions League. There must have been 2 teams qualifying back in those days, because we were certainly in the Champions League that autumn. You mentioned Liam Miller, God rest him, earlier. But one of the greatest Celtic performances of Martin O'Neill's era would come against Lyonnais at Celtic Park. That would be in the Champions League. The autumn of 2003, Celtic were paired with Bayern Munich, Anderlecht and Lyon. Really tough group, top sides. But yet again at home, Celtic hammered Anderlecht at home, beat Lyon with a credible performance. Larsson and Liam Miller scored. Chris Sutton scored, both from Henrik Larsson crosses. That was as good as it went. And Bayern got a draw in November, and they celebrated the draw because they were the first side, I think, in 9 attempts to get a point for Celtic Park in the Champions League. Celtic were ruthless back then at home. In Munich, Alan Thompson scores with a great header. Celtic's get the game, 20 minutes to go. Celtic are looking to win in Munich. Celtic fans will know what happened. Individual errors cost us. They'll just leave it at that. And then we lost the game that really hurt us. I was over in Brussels for the Anderlecht game. They had a young Vincent Kompany playing at centre half. That was a winnable away tie for Celtic, and we lost 1-0 with a goal disallowed, I think, but we lost 1-0. And then we went to France and needing to sort of avoid defeat to qualify from this ridiculously tough group. We came back from 2-1 down to level it, and with a couple of minutes to go, Celtic are going through to the final stages of the Champions League, and we give away the most crazy penalty. And you remember the Brazilian player that played for Lyon, Juninho?
Oh, Juninho, the one with the free kicks, yeah.
One of the free kicks.
Pernambucano, yeah.
I had Lyon fans in my tour last week, and we're talking about this guy. Pernambucano, my pronunciation, it's something like that.
Yeah.
What a player he was. Anyway, he steps up to take the penalty. If you want to bet your mortgage on a guy putting a penalty to send you through, it's on him, isn't he? And sure his fate. So Celtic's record in away games in Europe, it's littered with last-minute heartache. can all the way back. Juventus and Turin, the very first game, were absolutely robbed. 2 each in Turin with a ridiculous penalty decision that I think Martin O'Neill got banned for. He described it as extraordinary. He was being polite. There was a feeling that Celtic were just on the cusp, but just you mentioned earlier, maybe just a slice of luck at the right time would have seen us go. That team probably of 2003, who won it that year? AC Milan, maybe that year. That team of 2003 were capable of going a fair distance. I never winning the Champions League and getting to the last 8 are two different things. But Celtic certainly were strong enough. Very unfortunate not to qualify from that really, really difficult group. As I say, we, Anderlecht, Lyon, and Bayern in it. We just always fell just that fraction short in those vital moments. So the rebuild from Seville, I felt, could have taken us the next stage. Was it turned out within a couple of years for a number of reasons. Henrik would move on, and then Martin would have to move on, and never quite get back to those levels. If I'm being brutally honest, never quite get back. We're spending an awful lot of money back then, and maybe that was unsustainable, and we sort of, Gordon Strachan came in a couple of years earlier, and we sort of had to reset the club a wee bit and move on. We never quite. And saying that, Martin never got to the last 16 of the Champions League, but both Gordon Strachan and Neil Lennon did, again in ridiculous groups moving forward. But those were sort of isolated, where you felt that Martin was building something season after season. Celtic's qualification to the latter stages was more sporadic. As I say, Gordon Strachan absolutely punched above his weight, got us through a couple of times, and then we got through to the last 16, and we've been drawn against Barcelona or AC Milan, and even at that, it took an extra time goal for Kaká in Milan, and they won it that year. So Celtic did. There was occasions over the forthcoming years where Celtic would punch above our weight, but if I'm being honest, the strength of the team. The strength of the teams that followed Martin O'Neill were not as high as the team under Martin. And again, I say that with the greatest respect. These guys played their hearts out for Celtic and took us places. Neil Lennon's side beat Barcelona, Messi and all, without our star striker, without our captain. We lost a late winner in Barcelona in some like 95 minutes. And then 2 weeks later we beat them. So these sides, sometimes magic happens at Celtic Park, and these sides, from time to time, gave us some wonderful nights. But there's been a few sore ones as well. So it's nice to think. Never really take the time to think back and compare. But as I say, if you were doing a sort of days of your life type article, then while there was personal sadness for me, there was stuff going on in the park that was just incredible. There was nights that I'll remember forever. I've talked about them earlier, nights in Blackburn, Seville for different reasons, Stuttgart. There's 1,000 memories crammed into that wee season alone. So I'm thankful we were able to witness that firsthand.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. And please read the main blog article as well for more detail. The link is included on the video upload description, along with our respective contact information and the links to Mr. Corr's books. So, Matt, thank you once again, and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Well, welcome, Shahan. It was my pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.